Hi everyone, welcome to Proudly Jewish. I'm Cantor Eyal Bitton. My special guest today is Shabbos Kestenbaum. He's a recent graduate of Harvard Divinity School who is emerging as a leading voice among Jewish activists. Many of you might know him as the guy who is suing Harvard for anti-Semitism. I think we'll flesh out a little more of the details as we go along. First of all, Shabbos, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You've been on Fox News. You've been covered. Your lawsuit has been covered by major news networks, if not all of them. You were the third guest ever on Shai Davidai's recent new podcast, Here I Am. You've testified before the Congressional House Education and Workforce Committee about anti-Semitism at Harvard. And you have you also spoke at the Republican National Convention this summer. And you're young in my books. How did this happen? How did all this happen? And how is it that you're up to the challenge?
Well, it's a good question. It's a question that I asked myself that the whole time because how did it happen? I'm young. I'm just a student. I don't know how to give speeches. I don't know how to give testimony. I don't know how to speak to the media. When I started speaking out, which was shortly after October 7th, I didn't particularly have a strategy. I didn't have a long-term plan, and I didn't really have a goal. It was more of what I was experiencing individually was so irrational, was so absurd, was so hurtful that I felt like I just had to speak. And at first I resorted to social media, specifically Twitter, which is something I just did not have experience in. I actually remember my first tweet my roommate helped me craft. And about 2 weeks, not even, maybe even 10 days after I had posted my first tweet, a producer from Fox News contacted me, citing that tweet, saying,
Yeah.
"Would you like to go on air to express your thoughts?" And as I said, I didn't have a goal, I didn't have a vision. It was more of the immediate concern was to just respond to what was happening at Harvard. And I went quite literally speaking to, my 2 or 3 followers on social media to now I had a national audience of hundreds of thousands of listeners on TV. And I guess one interview led to another, which led to another. But I didn't plan for any of this. And I get a lot of criticism, some fair, some not so fair. And some of the not so fair criticism is that I'm in this for the attention. I like the camera. I like the media appearances. But the reality is, I would be more than happy for other students to take the lead on this. I would be more than happy for someone else to become the face of this movement. But one of the reasons I started speaking out is because, as the ethics of our fathers teach us, "B'makom she'ein hanashim yishtadel liosish," when there's a place where there are no men, strive to be a man, strive to fill that void. And I felt that there weren't enough people talking not just about the situation at Harvard, but the situation that all too many Jewish students on college campuses were experiencing. So I did what I did best. I just started complaining. And thank God I've been really privileged and fortunate and honored to have been given a platform. And I take that with a serious sense of responsibility.
Well, I've heard you speak, and you're no slouch, but I hear what you're saying. I'm a cantor, and I'm comfortable singing in front of a lot of people, and that sometimes is confused with wanting the attention of being in front of a lot of people and singing. No, there's something I want to relate to people and have a certain skill and that I bring to it, or try to. And there are people who might be doing it better and all that stuff. But I hear you in a different sphere. And in the sphere that you're speaking of, we, the Jewish community, so many of us have been deers in headlights after October 7th, not expecting I like to say, the tsunami of hate towards Jews in so many levels of society. And we need people to step up, and we're a small people. So, if not me, then who? Right? That's sort of where you're coming from. You got to do what you can, and wouldn't it be amazing if everyone was a leader and was able to have this platform and speak up? let's go back. I really want to hear what happened at Harvard, but let's step back for a moment so we can get there. Did everything change for you on October 7th? Did, and how? Like what happened for you? I think the entire Jewish people felt something, but for you.
Well, I think most fundamentally, you mentioned by introducing me as a young person, and as a young person, I had never experienced Israel as an existential issue. Certainly, Israel has challenges. Certainly, Israel has always dealt with terrorism. I lived in the old city of Jerusalem for 2 years. I studied in yeshiva, and I remember that there would be stabbings in the old city, and it wasn't great. We didn't like it. We prayed, but that was the reality. But to experience Israel as an issue whereby its very survival is in question, I simply could not relate to it. I did not grow up during the Yom Kippur War, during the Six-Day War, Lebanon. I was 6 years old during the Second Intifada. I just don't have memories of it. However, for the very first time in my life and in the lives of basically every young Jewish American, we were confronted with the reality overnight that the place that our grandparents live, the place where we go to vacation for Passover, the place where some of us are privileged to study at, all of a sudden that place is under attack in a way that it was never under attack before. And that leads into the second part of the question was, how did it change me? I'm an Orthodox Jew, meaning I don't use my phone on the Sabbath. I don't use electronics on the Sabbath. For the very first time in my life, I did use my phone on the Sabbath because I have 3 siblings, 2 in-laws, a nephew, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins who live in Israel. And on the night of October 7th or the night of October 6th, whatever the time difference was, these rumors circulated. There was a bombing, there was a terrorist attack, it was a stabbing. As I said, that's par for the course, unfortunately, of having a Jewish state. However, the rumors persisted, and it was quite clear that this was something entirely different. So I was encouraged to use my phone, and that's what I did. And I spent hours trying to locate my loved ones, and thank God they were okay. But that's not the case of all Jewish students at Harvard. There were many who did lose friends or loved ones on October 7th. And this is also true across the board of Jews on college campuses. They're experiencing the Jewish joyous holiday of Simchas Torah. They're at their college Chabad or their college Hillel, the institutions of Jewish life. And all of a sudden, they're confronted with a new reality. So there's this great line by MLK, we won't remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Wow. And I would argue that many of us at Harvard would have been lucky had we simply had the silence of our friends. But we had 34 student groups at Harvard representing more than 1,000 students see exactly what was going on their TVs, seeing images of kidnapped babies, of burnt bodies, of women bleeding from their private areas. And their reaction was to jump out of bed. Some were still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. This statement literally began by saying, we hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all ongoing violence in the Middle East. This is the night of October 7th. And that letter became a little infamous. It received national attention, and I'm sure many of your listeners have heard about that letter. But there were lots of things that didn't receive national attention. I was part until they kicked me out, of a student WhatsApp group at Harvard Divinity School. I study religion. So Harvard Divinity School bills itself as creating ethical and moral leaders of tomorrow. In this student WhatsApp group, a student had posted a rally that they were organizing. This is the night of October 7th, called Long Live the Palestinian Resistance, Victory is Ours. And my classmates responded as if he was planning a picnic in the park. Can I make signs? Is this open to the community members? I mean, that's shocking. And that is something I will never be able to forgive and certainly never be able to forget. So October 7th changed everything in a very, very real way. I don't know how political you want to get into, but being vague for a second, I've always been more to the left of things. I'm happy to compare my progressive credentials any day of the week, but it became glaringly obvious that those progressive allies, those progressive classmates who quite rightly go out of their way with trigger warnings, with pronouns, with Black Lives Matter, When it came to our moment of distress, we in the Jewish community, we were left with very, very few voices of support.
It is shocking. There's so much I want to unpack there, but look, with the last thing that you said, the progressive side, my goal as a clergy and as a Jewish community leader for years has been wherever you are on the political spectrum, you are part of the Jewish people. And when it comes to Israel's existence, we need to fight or not or claim our place at the table, whether you're at the left or on the right or wherever it may be, in whatever country. And why? Because it's our ancestral homeland. And what does it mean not to have it? Well, genocide. Well, we know we have 2,000 years of experience of knowing what it's like to be homeless as a people. Did you feel that the Jews around you, Jewish students, were as shocked as you were, and if so, were they motivated to act, or were they sort of frightened into silence?
So as I said, one of the criticisms I often get, well, actually, this is a new criticism. One of the new criticisms is that I'm the self-declared spokesman of the Harvard Jewish community. And of course, I never said that, and I would never be so arrogant to say that, because the reaction of Jews has been multifaceted, and the experiences of one individual is not the same of other individuals. So I will answer the question based on anecdotal evidence and stories that people have entrusted to me, while also recognizing that the reaction from Jews was different. So let's start from one extreme. We'll start at the Harvard Divinity School, again, where I study, which is really the to the left of the left. This is an outpost of I wouldn't even call it progressivism, as you'll come to understand in a moment. There were Jewish students at Harvard Divinity School who, and I of course won't name names, but who took the approach that what is happening is a natural reaction to 75 years of apartheid, of settler colonialism, of genocide. And in fact, the Religion and Public Life Department at Harvard Divinity School releases their own statement on October 11th or 10th, maybe. And they begin by saying, the great Palestinian poet once said, to understand a story, you have to go to the root of it. And they say, if you start the story on October 7th and not with 75 years of Nakba, not with 75 years of the illegal displacement of Palestinians and settler colonialism, you'll only come to one story. Of course, there was no mention of Hamas. There certainly was no condemnation of Hamas. So that's on one extreme. And of course, those Jewish students will later run protests where they chant for the globalization of the Intifada. They will become leaders in the encampment where they follow me and other students on our way to class. So that was one reaction of some Jews at Harvard. Another reaction was, we need to build bridges. We need to fix this harm within our community. And people really tried. I was in that camp initially, really tried to have dialogue between groups. The reason I stopped being in that camp is, let's call a spade a spade. Our ideological adversaries had almost no interest in that expression of academic discourse and understanding. And I'll give you one quick anecdote. A major producer from a network program that I won't name was in touch with me a week after October 7th, saying that he wanted to have a live TV debate with me representing the Israeli side and an pro-Palestinian student at Harvard representing his or her side. And that interview was never aired. It was never even filmed, because we were unable to this day to get a single pro-Palestinian student leader at Harvard to agree to debate us, because in their own words, we don't want to legitimize the Zionist narrative. So I thought the building bridges things is nice, but it's just not practical. And then there are others who are sort of in my camp of expose, fight, yell, don't adopt their tactics, because their tactics are cruel and do not serve a purpose, but adopt the tactics of being just as passionate for your cause as they are. So I don't know the numbers. I can't say many or most or the plurality. I don't know. But a significant amount, that's vague enough, a significant amount we're in that camp of we have to fight back. I mean, we have to fight this. What is happening is so absurd. And we were able to form a WhatsApp group of the Harvard Jewish community. Of course, is that all types of Jews? No, it was for a particular type. Now, I will say this probably was the majority of Jews who believe in the viability and the strength of the state of Israel and would probably call ourselves Zionists. And we began to organize. And I'm very, very proud that I'm part of that community. And that community, I would say, is certainly the Harvard Chabad community, and for the most part, the Harvard Hillel community.
Nice. Did you feel that some of these students, look, you mentioned BLM before and some of the movements, social justice movements, you didn't use that term, but a bit of that. A lot of Jews that I heard, whatever age, that were, lending their voices on social media and what have you to these movements, saw themselves as Jews as being privileged. In terms of the students that you've noticed at Harvard or the communities around you in general, do you feel that a lot of the Jewish members of the Jewish community were shocked because of that? Oh, we thought we were part of this group, but we're seen that way. Or was it an awakening for those people, do you feel?
Look, there was anti-Semitism before October 7th, and I could give you anecdotes, but it was there. It's sort of what I viewed as a genteel anti-Semitism. And in fact, I wrote an article in October about anti-Semitism at Harvard, October of 2022, saying that, this is like a weird problem that we're not really addressing, but it's definitely there. And, the article went nowhere. No one really read it, and no one really spoke about it. And then, of course, after October 7th, sort of vindicated. So some Jews were shocked, some Jews were surprised. And yeah, in terms of this rubric of race, I'm sure we'll talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, but there was a sense by some Jews that Jews are part of the white privileged class. And again, you would get more of that sense at the divinity school, which is more to the left. But then there are other Jews, especially Israelis, who would say, what are you talking about? We're not white. We're not from Eastern Europe. We're from Egypt. We're from Morocco. We're from Yemen. What a ridiculous concept. And in fact, good timing or bad timing, depending on your perspective, but there was a course taught this past year at Harvard Divinity School called Jews and Race. And it sort of began to unpack this dilemma. What are Jews? And I'll just tell you something interesting. Our lawsuit pertains to gross violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act prohibits institutions that receive federal dollars from discrimination. And the discrimination is based on three categories. One of those categories is national origin. You're a cantor, and maybe the rabbis would say Jews are exclusively a religion. That's who we are. But what the Trump administration did was reclassify national origin, or more specifically, reclassify Judaism. Judaism under federal law is no longer simply a religion, but it's now an ethnicity. It's now a race. It's now a people. So that's why we're able to sue our university, because all of a sudden, now we become a protected class under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So there are these ongoing and really interesting and complex discussions as to what or who Jews are. But definitely, as I said, the experience and the reactions of Jews, it's multifaceted. So there are many who would say that we do have white privilege and we cannot relate to the experiences of other minority groups. And then you have people like me who say that that's just simply not true. When I get death threats from the far right and the far left, it's not because I have white privilege.
Yeah. And you've mentioned this before, I think in other interviews, you're a visible Jew. Because you wear a kippah, because you're Orthodox, and you're a public persona at this point. So, yeah, the images that came out that you were talking about that came out on October 7th, and I was up that night till 4 a.m. or so. I'm on the West Coast, just looking at on Twitter, and I couldn't. It was unbelievable, these images, and I felt that in my lifetime, I don't think that anyone in North America has been exposed to this degree of atrocities. Why do you think that these people took the side that they did and blamed the Jewish state? Is it anti-Semitism?
Larry Summers was the former president of Harvard University, and he came up with a great line of there are two types of anti-Semitism. There's the anti-Semitism in effect and anti-Semitism in intent. And I think we can debate the anti-Semitism in intent. Do these students know what river and what sea? Do they know what an intifada is? My personal take is yes, they do. I mean, at Harvard, they've explicitly said we know what an intifada is. So I don't buy that argument. But regardless of the intent, the effect is anti-Semitic. And in fact, federal law, when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes to Title VI, it actually doesn't care what the intent was. I'll give you, a made-up example. If you're a professor and you say something Islamophobic, that denigrates the Islamic religion, and you get called out or you're in a lawsuit and the professor says, oh, but I didn't intend it to be Islamophobic, it's irrelevant if that's how it was perceived by the Muslim student. So too, when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's sort of irrelevant what the intent is. So in terms of where this obsession comes from, and it really is an obsession, the Religion and Public Life Department, which I mentioned in my prior answer, they've had more than 40 events on Israel-Palestine in the 2 years I've been there. I mean, that's a large amount to spend on a very small country. Especially, I used to be very active with the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are an ethnic Muslim minority in China. They're facing an actual genocide. I cannot recall a single event on China or the Uyghurs in the 2 years I've been at Harvard. I
Right.
really can't. At Harvard Divinity School, I should say, to be specific. It really is an obsession. I do think part of it, and this is speculative, of course, I do think part of it comes from the question you asked earlier, especially with the advent of DEI. The ideology of the curriculum is really based in one whereby you can split all classes or all peoples into two classes, the oppressor and the oppressed. And Jews, especially American Jewry, have this misfortune of being characterized as white. So whether it was 40 babies or 40,000 babies beheaded on October 7th, it almost doesn't matter because, as my classmates will tell you, resistance is justified when people are occupied. And James Carville, the former, not former, I think he still is, a Democratic political strategist, he had I don't know if it was a Freudian slip or he meant to say it explicitly. He said, why do the Democrats care about Israel? Because the Israelis are whiter than the brown Palestinians. And that's why you have so much sympathies towards the Israelis, which again, it's obviously not true. More than half of the state of Israel are comprised of individuals from the Middle East, but whatever. But I do think it's taught in the classroom and it's amplified from the professors. I'll just give you one really quick example. Harvard Chabad showed the 45-minute Hamas video, the 45 minutes that Hamas commanders shot on their GoPros. And they showed it. Harvard University was the first university in the world to show it. And a couple of hundred people show up, but the overwhelming majority of the people who show up are who? People like me, people in the Jewish community who are already outraged or who already have connections to Israel. We don't need to see it. But who weren't there? Number one, Claudine Gay, the president of the university at the time, she's not there. Most of the DEI staff aren't there. Most of the anti-Israel activists aren't there. And again, I think it really is because, as my classmates will say, I literally had a classmate actually tell me on October 9th or 10th, she said, what did you expect was going to happen? When you're living 75 years in a concentration camp, it's only natural. Just like I've heard so many comparisons at Harvard to the Warsaw Ghetto, that Gaza simply broke out of their ghetto. And just like we in the Jewish community look to them as martyrs and heroes, that's how we in the Palestinian community view them as. And that very much is taught. That is instruction from the classroom. And look, I can say this as someone who had direct experience with that curriculum. That's someone who was in those classrooms. So
It's disturbing. And what happened at Harvard that led to this lawsuit? What's this lawsuit about? That you can share. I don't know how much is
no, I could share. I could share.
Disclosed and what have you.
Happy to share. The real question is, how much time do you have? So we filed the lawsuit in mid-January, and we filed it not because we wanted to, but because we really had to. We exhausted all possible avenues of recourse. In the early days, post October 7th, I can speak. I can't speak. There are 5 other plaintiffs. They're anonymous, and I can't speak for them, and they don't want me speaking for them. So let me talk about me. I emailed, Claudine Gay, and I emailed DEI people, and I emailed people at Harvard Divinity School with suggestions. Like, this is what you should do. I never got any responses. And then that was sort of on a positive note of me trying to be helpful. But then on the negative side, when things were occurring to me, when I was experiencing anti-Semitism, and then I would alert the university about it, then I never got responses. And then it became a lot more problematic. It's one thing to ignore good advice. It's another thing to ignore when your own students are put in harm's way. And that's what Harvard did time and time. They just ignored me. I mean, they actively ignored me. They actively fueled this fire of anti-Semitism. It was normalized, it was accepted, and in many cases at the divinity school, it was celebrated on campus. So there were just incidents after incidents that compounded upon each other. So when you have, for example, a staff member who challenges me to debate him as to whether Jews are behind 9/11, and then taunts you with a machete, saying that he has a plan to fight and he wants to bring down the Zionist mafia. When you mention that to the university and when you file police reports and say, hey, this guy knows where I live because he's in the Harvard directory. Now, what are you going to do to make sure that he doesn't have access to campus? What's his employment status? And when you don't hear back, to this day, I haven't heard back from them. I mean, that's unacceptable. It's dangerous. It's anti-American. It's anti-Semitic. When I am unable to go into Widener Library, which is the heart and soul of Harvard University, because masked thugs are surrounding the library chanting globalize the intifada, that is diminished educational opportunity. And it's a direct result of Harvard's feckless leadership and their inability or unwillingness to do anything about the problem. So our lawsuit, it's based on Title VI, which I mentioned earlier. Harvard has an obligation under federal law to make sure that no minority group is discriminated against. And number two, we have just a blatant breach of contract. When I give Harvard my tuition dollars, there's an expectation that number one, I will receive an education. And number two, there's like a basic modicum of security. And as I said, we've had diminished educational opportunities. I can't count anymore the times where, a building was surrounded from a protest or one area of the yard was blocked off because of these masked thugs. Or of course, later on, after we filed, we had to have an amended complaint. We actually had two amended complaints because you have the encampments and then you have professors who are publishing anti-Semitic cartoons. And time again, Harvard refused to do anything about it, or they would just reward the bad behavior. So violations of Title VI, a breach of contract, and we're incredibly grateful and appreciative that the judge saw the case for what it is, and we are the first case in American history that is going to trial that is based on a university's violations of Title VI. So we are aware of the historical significance. As Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility. And I do feel that it is a responsibility because at this point, even though the lawsuit, of course, is me and the five plaintiffs, I like to think this sends a broader message of, we all remember that the Atlantic article of, is the golden age of American Jewry over? And this lawsuit sends a very strong and clear message, not without a fight.
Yeah. It's an amazing achievement to have gotten this far. It shouldn't have happened, right? We shouldn't be here, given the situation. It's amazing that the judge did accept this and all that. What's the next step? When does it come to trial? Do you know? Do you have the dates?
Yeah, so this is when I do have to be more careful.
Okay.
We are in theory going to trial. We don't have dates set. But I'll put it this way. As you quite rightly just pointed out, it shouldn't come to this. It shouldn't come to a trial. It shouldn't come to a lawsuit. It is a damning indictment on the state of higher education that in order for a minority group of students to feel that they have been heard, in order to receive equity and justice and equality, they have to resort to a court of law. That's a damning indictment on the state of higher education and a damning indictment on the state of being Jewish at Harvard. Having said that, Harvard can correct this at any point. At any point, should they decide that they are going to implement policies to counter anti-Semitism, that they're going to discipline students and staff members, that they're going to do right by me and the five other plaintiffs, then we don't have to go to trial. But if Harvard refuses to accept the reality, if they refuse to acknowledge their wrongdoing and their active role in creating an unsafe environment for Jewish students, then we'll go to trial.
The legal world is another matter, and I'm going to step back, I think, and talk more globally about anti-Semitism.
I don't want angry phone calls from my lawyers, so I got to be careful.
Exactly. But remarkable it's gotten that again, great achievements. And look, I worry about the outcome personally. That if it's not, in the, I'd hate at the end of all this for Jews to feel, oh, we're not being heard. I think back. There was this convoy, pro-Palestinian convoy, I think in 2021 in London, England, that were driving down the road with Palestinian flags and shouting terrible things that they're going to do to Jews and to Jewish women. And it was dismissed. It was dismissed. And I think, many Jews feel abandoned. I don't know. I'm not British. I'm not on the ground there. I don't know to what extent, but I've heard that. So whatever happens of this, I hope that people do listen and we feel heard. So good luck on that. You spoke about DEI. Anti-Semitism has always been there. Okay, fine. It's always been out there. And as you said before, with DEI, you have this duality, this binary, oppressed and the oppressor. And there's not much room for nuance at all. And do you feel that we have any chance to combat anti-Semitism without dealing with DEI?
That's a phenomenal question. I remember speaking with lawmakers, with congressmen and women from both sides of the aisle, and the question they often pose is DEI amend or end? I'm liberal, okay? I've never, even though I spoke at the RNC, I've never voted for a Republican before in my life. I have marched with Black Lives Matter. I protested when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. As I said, I'm happy to compare my progressive credentials any day of the week. At the same time, given my direct experiences with DEI, I can say that there is nothing progressive, there is nothing liberal, there is nothing equity-esque about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion as individual terms are good things. We should all strive for more equitable spaces and places, absolutely. But the framework at which those ideals are applied on college campuses are deeply problematic. They directly fuel anti-Semitism, and they do nothing to advance their own stated causes. Let's leave aside anti-Semitism just for a moment. I don't like to be speculative. I like looking in the facts and in the data. And the data supports that in professional settings where they've introduced diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the rate of respondents who feel more included or a greater sense of belonging either remains stagnant or it actually decreases. DEI on face value hasn't actually worked with its stated purposes. It just hasn't. And now let's plug back in anti-Semitism. When Yishai Ribo, who's a popular Israeli musician, when he was invited by Harvard Chabad to come, sing nice, happy songs for Jewish students who were just being victimized by anti-Semites, the reaction of our classmates was not only did they have a boycott, but they had this vicious protest chanting glory to the martyrs, globalize the Intifada, river to the sea. And we had to hire, or Chabad had to hire 15 armed guards. And I remember I emailed DEI and I decided to play by their own game. I said, look, if the whole shtick is making more equitable spaces where all minority groups can feel included, I said, at the very least, can you condemn the fact that our own classmates have made such an unsafe learning environment that to sing these happy nights Jewish songs, we need security? And DEI wrote back and literally said, we're sorry that you feel the need to hire security, but this does not fall under our purview. This is the same DEI that had everything to say about George Floyd, had everything to say about Russia invading Ukraine, had everything to say about the reversal of Roe v. Wade. But when it came to their own Jewish students who were saying, like, we're not safe, all of a sudden, it doesn't fall under our purview. That is a blatant double standard. That is anti-Semitic. And as we will prove in court, that's discriminatory. That is no way to run an institution, especially one of higher learning, and especially one that is mantra is about creating more equitable spaces. So I'm happy to be proven wrong. And I know that for many people, affirmative action programs have helped them. There needs to be some recognition that DEI in its current form really, at best, does not help those causes, and at worst, creates more divisions. And I'm in that camp of DEI is clearly creating more divisions.
Yeah, I as a public person in my community, as a cantor, I've avoided weighing in on this. I've had discussions with people and public ones, and the statistics that I see are pretty convincing. I saw some statistic that showed, and this is not going to be very helpful because I don't have it in front of me, but I remember seeing something about how many DEI officers tweeted negatively about Israel versus how many posted negatively about any other conflict or about China, and it was huge difference, a huge one. So and when this simplistic way of looking at Jews and Israel is based on this oppressed and oppressor binary, I worry that there's no way to defeat or lower the heat without addressing it. And I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm saying either get rid of it or change it so that ameliorate it, find a way to make it better.
At its core, DEI treats people differently based on their race or their religion or ethnicity or whatever it is. And that's at its core, that's what it does. Right. My parents grew up in the UK, actually, and affirmative action programs in the UK, I don't know if this is true anymore, but certainly when they were there, it was called reverse discrimination.
Yeah.
Or positive discrimination, some people called it. But the bottom line is, whether you're doing it with the right intention or not, as Larry Summers says, anti-Semitism in effect versus anti-Semitism in intent, it's irrelevant, because if you have a program that sees individuals differently because of their race, class, religion, that's problematic. And again, let's look at the data. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. 25, that's a significant amount. Today, in 2024, it's 4% Jewish. It's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's not because we have had a crisis of intelligence the last couple of decades. It's because we do not fall under that DEI rubric. Because, as I said, the Jews have the misfortune of being characterized as white, and therefore we don't look. We in the Harvard admissions office, we don't just look at the merits, at the academic rigor, at the intellectual capabilities of a student. We look at them through this prism of race, class, and religion. And again, don't take my word for it. Last summer, before October 7th, Harvard's admissions criteria was found by the United States Supreme Court to be unconstitutional. That they were discriminating against Asian Americans. That if you were an African American student and you were an Asian American student and you were both applying to Harvard University, the Asian American had to get significantly higher test grades. Wow. That's discriminatory. Now, does that mean that African Americans shouldn't have a chance at university? Of course they should. And anything counter that would be racism and discriminatory and abhorrent. But should certain races or classes or religions have a leg up, but simply by virtue of their race or religion? I'm not convinced that they should. No.
Now, again with DEI, I heard another interview with you where you spoke about a complaint being made to DEI, the DEI office falling on deaf ears when a certain individual named Nora Erekat came to speak, was invited to speak. Can you tell us what happened in this incident?
Fantastic example. Nora Erekat is a professor. I don't remember if she has tenure. She's a professor at Rutgers University. Rutgers is investigating her for anti-Semitism. The investigation won't go anywhere because Rutgers is inherently anti-Semitic. Story for another time. This is a woman who is, forget about, did not condemn October 7th. She appeared on panels with Hamas commanders. That's not an exaggeration. People should, if they don't believe me, go on my social media. I posted the events that she has participated with and on. I'm very careful now, especially that I have somewhat of a public profile. I'm very careful about the people that I agree to be interviewed by, if there's a panel, who's going to be on it. And there have been occasions, I won't mention names, but there have been occasions actually where I've stepped back from an event because they were bringing in someone who I thought was really counter to my values. Can you imagine a rational adult woman consenting to be on a panel with a member of Hamas, and especially a member of Hamas who has promised October 7th a million more times? So the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard, together with the Religion and Public Life Department and other departments at Harvard, they invited her to speak. And not only that, she was a fellow at Harvard Divinity School for a year, in the Peace Religion Institutes at Harvard Divinity School. I mean, this is insane. and totally inexcusable, especially at an institution like Harvard, which has a track record of rescinding controversial speakers, rightly or wrongly. So I of course, emailed DEI and emailed the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and went through the whole process. And I only got one response. I got one response from DEI. And they said, don't worry, because the Center for Middle Eastern Studies have assured us the event isn't mandatory.
Huh.
I mean, how do you even begin to reform an institution like that, where the answer is don't worry because the program isn't mandatory? And again, it's stunning hypocrisy. Harvard was ranked 248th out of 248 universities by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions when it comes to free speech. This is not a university that, like the University of Chicago, that defends free speech and controversial speakers and academic rigor when it pushes you beyond your comfortable zones. This is a university that coddles, that placates, that rescinds, that expels. But this remarkable thing happened after October 7th. All of a sudden, the universities became quite particular and quite insistent that they defend virtues of the First Amendment. I mean, what a joke, what hypocrisy, what hurtful hypocrisy. So I have nothing redeeming I can say about DEI at Harvard. I think it must be dismantled, and the amount of wasted money and staff and resources that they suck up is really unjustified.
And for my viewers about Erekat, she also claimed that Israeli women were not raped. And she claims, or has claimed, that Israel systemically rapes Palestinian women. And she's praised a senior member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a designated terrorist organization, and has called them a martyr. So it's a little problematic. The individual's a little problematic. I'm disturbed here. I can't imagine if I were back in university how I would feel about her speaking at my university, given that they were strict about who was speaking in other situations.
Exactly.
Right? So what has to happen at Harvard and perhaps other academic institutions so that Jewish voices are heard, or that at least they feel that they're being heard?
It's a complicated question, but I do think there are some basic answers already out there, and a lot of it ties into our lawsuit. Harvard currently has mandatory Title IX training for all incoming students, where they learn the dangers of fat phobia, of transphobia, of sexism. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't do those things. I'm saying that's what they do, and they're not going to stop. If they're going to do those trainings, why in the hell hasn't anti-Semitism been part of those trainings? And they're not part of those trainings. That's an easy fix. Harvard has a zero tolerance policy for homophobia, for racism. In fact, when there was a homophobic incident last year, the student that day was expelled. There was immediate condemnation. When 12 admitted students were found to have sent racist and sexist memes in a private WhatsApp group, Harvard rescinded their acceptances. There should be a zero tolerance policy for anti-Semitism. We're not asking for special treatment under the law. We're asking for equal treatment under the law. We are simply asking Harvard to apply the same standards that they do for every other minority group. There should be an overview of the curriculum that's being taught in classes, where there have consistently been complaints for years that the material is anti-Semitic, like the classes that I took in many cases. These professors are known entities. Some Jewish students avoid those classes as a result. There should be an independent party, an independent third monitor, to make sure Harvard is in compliance with their Title VI obligations. But I think fundamentally, and this is not just true of the university system, this is true of American society, and this is true of our politics. You can have as much anti-Semitism training as you want. You could send all of Harvard to a Holocaust museum, and those things are good. Ultimately, how do you get rid of a problem like racism? Racism will always exist, unfortunately, by certain segments of the community. American society will always have racists amongst them. But Blacks don't sit at the back of the bus, and Blacks don't drink at a different water cooler, and they don't send their kids to different schools. Why? Because if you are a racist and you act upon that racism, there's a penalty to be paid. We prosecute crime. And this is where I get very frustrated as a Democrat with the Biden-Harris administration, because with all of their condemnations of the riots in LA or the mistreatment of Jews on the New York City subways, what they never do is say we are going to mobilize the Department of Justice and we are going to prosecute all of those criminals who prevented Jews from going into their place of worship to pray. And universities and societies need to adopt that. The best way to counter anti-Semitism or racism or any form of discrimination is if someone acts on it, you discipline it right away, as opposed to incentivizing it, which is what we're seeing today. The Harvard encampment leaders agreed to get rid of their tents. Why? Not because they were dissuaded by academic discipline, but because the university, and in particular the Harvard president, Alan Garber, said, if you pack away the tents, we will reverse all of your suspensions. You can speak with the Harvard Management Corporation to talk about divesting Harvard's $50 billion endowment from Israel. You can meet with senior faculty member to talk about a Palestinian study center. So you've now incentivized these students who have already said, look what happens when we mobilize. We win. The student intifada lives on. The Columbia University Apartheid Divestment Coalition, they said last week that encampments are now the baseline. That is the minimum of their activism because they can just get what they want. So stop incentivizing bad actors and punish these crimes, punish these criminals. When there are acts of anti-Semitism, yes, you condemn it. You should do that, absolutely. But that is not a substitute for action. And that's what we've been missing for basically a year now.
Yeah. I appreciate that answer. You've given us a lot to think about on all of those points. And
I'm happy to get pushback. I know everyone doesn't agree with that. And that's fine. But, come up with a better answer, because this is what I've seen. I've just seen, lawlessness, really just blatant disregard for rules and policies and laws.
Yeah. So without weighing in on the politics of things, I think that a lot of people can agree with the idea that, look, when there are no repercussions to anti-Semitic acts, you're not going to help the situation, right? You may well incentivize. What do you say to those people who make the differentiation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? I say this because every time that I post something, a YouTube, podcast, a message of some sort online about anti-Semitism, there's always someone who's going to make the differentiation and go, no, you're conflating things. What's your answer to that?
Easy. Most of those people who make those claims are either not Jewish themselves or they're deeply uneducated Jews. When it comes to criticism of Israel, I know that's not your question, but let me just address that first. When it comes to criticism of Israel, there's not a Jewish person alive who believes that criticism of Israeli policy is anti-Semitic. And I hate how our ideological adversaries always say criticism of Israel isn't anti-Semitic, because none of us said it was. So it's a lazy argument. That's number one. In terms of the anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, number one, almost every single anti-Semite is an anti-Zionist. Okay. Yeah, there might be some exceptions, maybe, but overwhelmingly. But number two, much more fundamentally, is you cannot separate the Jewish people from Zionism or the land of Zion. I'll use it that way. I'm an Orthodox Jew, meaning I pray 3 times a day. The direction I pray, and that every Jew, when they do pray, is Jerusalem. We've been doing that for 3,000 years. We have been talking about the return to Zion for 3,000 years. We just had on last week, I don't remember the day. Tuesday, thank you. We just had on Tuesday the fast of Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, where we commemorate in 586 BC and in 70 AD, the Romans and then the Babylonians destroyed our holy temple in Jerusalem, exiled the Jewish people from the land of Israel, and tried to discontinue our attachment to the land. When we get married, before we consummate the marriage, before the marriage becomes valid or legal, we break a glass under the wedding canopy nativity to symbolize that we are still in exile and that God himself has his home in Jerusalem still unbuilt and unfinished. To separate the people of Israel from the land of Israel is deeply anti-Semitic. Why are we called Jews or Yehudim? Because we come from Judea. We literally come from a geographic area on planet Earth that we can pinpoint to and say our foundations, our origins as a people literally originates with the land. We are deeply and inherently and intrinsically forever connected to the land of Israel. And the moment anyone tries to argue against it, or worse, when they try to disconnect the people from their land, that is unquestionably anti-Semitic. So I find that argument so lazy, so silly, so devoid of history, and I'm incredibly passionate, as any Jew is, or educated Jew, I should say, of our attachment and the commandments that we do every day to remind us of our attachment to the land of Israel. So anti-Zionism, unquestionably, irrefutably anti-Semitic, case closed.
Great answer. There was one thing you said at the very beginning of that answer that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it means the following. You're also saying, look, that definition should come from us and not from the non-Jewish community. Am I accurate in going,
that's accurate. And let me just add, that's not a radical position.
Right, yeah.
African Americans define what is derogatory and offensive and hurtful to them. I, as a white person, would never, it wouldn't even occur to me to tell an African American, yeah, I know someone called you the N-word, but he didn't mean it. You know, to you it's racist, but to him, he meant it as a sign of camaraderie. That argument, that defense would never stand. But Jewish people are the only minority group in the world that are not allowed to define what's hurtful, derogatory, harmful, or anti-Semitic. I mean, it's a fascinating phenomenon. You know, you would never tell the LGBTQ community what is or isn't homophobic. You wouldn't tell the African-American community what is or isn't racist. But everyone feels entitled to tell the Jewish community what is or isn't anti-Semitic. It's fascinating.
If you had to, as we get close to the end of our conversation here, if you had to talk to the kids, the Jewish kids of America, about identity, about Jewish identity and awareness of what's going on around them, what would you tell them? And perhaps either answer that question, or what do you think that our communities are not doing well in conveying to our Jewish kids about Jewish identity and the reality that we're in?
Sure. I'll start with the second part of the question, and this might be controversial, and I'm happy to get pushed back. I'm an Orthodox Jew. Hopefully you can see the kippah. I grew up learning how to read Hebrew, learning how to pray, going to Israel almost all the time, going to camps that teach Jewish texts. You know, I was studying the Mishnah and then the Talmud and then Jewish law at a fairly early age. And that's pretty typical, if not overwhelmingly the case, of the Orthodox community. The Orthodox community is not large. We're about 10 to 15% of American Jewry. We're not particularly big, but that's what we do. We're typically well educated, going to a public school. I wouldn't say it's unheard of, but of the couple of people who do go to public school, it's for very specific reasons. In the Orthodox community, there are organizations that will actually pay families to take their kids out of public school and send them to a Jewish day school. So we're quite well educated. This is the controversial part. Am I making an unfair generalization? Yes, and I'm happy to get pushback. It seems, in my personal experience and based on anecdotal evidence, that is not always the case with the much larger conservative and reform movements. People who I have met, whether it's at Harvard, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in the political world, people who I've met who come from the conservative and certainly the reform communities, they either haven't learned the Talmud in a serious way, or they don't have the tools to learn the Talmud in a serious way. Regardless of whether they do or don't keep the Sabbath, more often than not, they're probably unlikely to be able to articulate what the 39 malachos, the 39 prohibitions of the Sabbath are. And that's problematic. And again, if it's happening in the Orthodox community too, I think at a much lesser extent, but it's bad. Regardless of your denomination, the most important thing that you as a lay leader, me as a student, anyone in the Jewish world needs to be aware of is we have to educate young Jews. They must be educated. If they don't want to keep the Sabbath, that's fine. If they don't want to keep kosher, that's fine. But at least first know what kosher is. At least first know what the laws of Sabbath are. And then you can decide it's not for you. But increasingly, I'm meeting young Jews who don't really know what the Sabbath is, but they've nevertheless decided to not keep it. And yes, it's important to fight anti-Semitism. It's important to combat hatred and bigotry, but that's not the purpose of the Jewish people. Our purpose is not to complain on Fox News that a classmate drew another swastika. Our purpose is to live a life, I believe, in accordance with Jewish values and Jewish law. And you're only going to know what Jewish values are, and you're only going to learn what Jewish laws and values are if you learn it, if you study it, if you're educated, if you're in a Jewish school or a Sunday school even. And all too often, I'm just not seeing that. And I'll really close with this because hopefully I'm not trying to offend anyone, and I'm sorry if this is coming off as preachy, but all too often when we have politicians like Josh Shapiro, who's a good guy, and I'm sorry he wasn't picked as vice president, but when he talks about his Jewish values, he'll talk about tikkun olam, and it's sort of normalized in the Jewish world that if you have a go-to Jewish value, it's tikkun olam. I mean, tikkun olam, it's not mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. It is mentioned in the Talmud, but under a very specific context. It really just took on a meaning of its own in the last few decades. It really doesn't mean what people think it means, but there's so many other values. And I just don't think we as a community are doing enough to instill those values or teach those values to the next generation. So the main thing is be educated, educated. That is crucial. That is the foundation of our Jewish civilization.
Is an excellent answer. Whether a viewer agrees or disagrees, that's an excellent answer. My final question to you. Does American Jewry have a future?
If
in 5 words or less. No, I'm joking.
American Jewry has a future if we're willing to fight for it and defend it. I think if we are complacent, or certainly if we acquiesce to this loud, radical minority of students or society who are not just about the destruction of the Jewish state, but the destruction of the United States, if we are willing to inculcate a culture and an environment within our own Jewish community to stand up for our way of life, then I think we absolutely have a future. But we cannot be comfortable, not even for a moment. And what we're seeing post-October 7th is a reality in which Jews have become too comfortable and have become too complacent. Hopefully, this is a wake-up call. I can say anecdotally, Harvard Chabad has record numbers post-October 7th. While it is true there are some people who stopped wearing the yarmulke or they stopped wearing the Star of David, it's also true that for every one of them, there's 20 on the other side who've been more involved and more proud and even bashful of their Jewish identity. And that's beautiful. And that's totally an antidote to the problems we're seeing of complacency. So I do think there's a future so long as we have the next generation who are willing to fight for it. So thank you very much for having me. I really, really do appreciate it.
Shabbos Kestenbaum, thank you so much for giving me your time and for being so proudly Jewish.
Thank you. All the best.